Hi, my name is Gareth Haysom. I'm an urban food systems researcher working at the African Centre for Cities at the University of Cape Town. I will talk you through a few key emerging concepts which pertain to urban food systems in African and global South cities, but which apply and have relevance to all cities. This presentation is on global megatrends and how these influence how we engage with urban food issues. This presentation will first differentiate between a crisis and a trend, clarifying why it is important to focus on these phenomena and explaining their significance and impact on urban food systems. This session will then discuss each of the different standout megatrends affecting urban food systems in Africa, specifically the key food security component of agency. Point 1. Differentiation needed between crises and trend. Crises. This is a time of intense difficulty and danger. Trend is a general direction in which something is moving. Trends are also important because we are currently going through a period of intense change. Point 2. The 5 megatrends that we see as having the most profound impact on the food system, the urban system, and as a result the urban food system are climate change, biodiversity loss and resource depletion, urbanization, demographic shifts, and in particular the youth bulge, technological change and work, particularly digitization and informality, and a shift in the global economic power to Asia. It is worth noting 2 factors. Firstly, other scholars might prioritize different trends, and secondly, different megatrends are encountered with different intensity in different regions and at different times by different members of society. Point 3, discussing the different megatrends. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion. We often engage these issues separately. However, they are all interconnected, especially when considering food. Climate change creates significant challenges to the food system. Not only does it contribute to biodiversity loss, but biodiversity loss further contributes to and drives climate change. Biodiversity loss and climate change are not the only factors to bear in mind. Equally important is the wider resource depletion we are observing in multiple regions. A lack of access to fuels used in transportation and oils used for cooking and food manufacturing, etc., for example palm oil, creates significant stresses on the system. From a climate change perspective, if we wish to see a 43% reduction in greenhouse gases aspired to by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, global greenhouse gas emissions will have to peak before 2025. Current statistics do not give us confidence to believe that we are on track to achieve this. Hence, the most recent climate change report by the IPCC calls for even more radical responses. If we do not consider climate change, many future envisaged challenges will be significantly amplified. The intersections between climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion mean that food production, not just the production of food, but also the constraints on food distribution, will have a profound impact, especially given that many cities lack the capabilities to grow adequate amounts of food to comfortably and effectively feed their urban populations, relying largely on food originating from elsewhere. These issues will compound both food prices, the availability, quality, and variety of available food options. Urbanization. This is an urban food MOOC, therefore urbanization is an important consideration. However, not only is it a consideration, it is a significant megatrend. We argue that our governance structures, as well as our understanding of how the food system worked, has not maintained pace with our rapid transition to a predominantly urban world. Urbanization in the global south is also taking place in a manner that is distinctly different to how we conceptualize and understand urbanization in the global north. For most of the global south, people move into cities, but rarely on account of securing industrial jobs. Society is thus progressively shifting from an industrial to a technological world. In the south, migration is not restricted to cities, but is observed in growing settlements, which possess even more limited industrial employment opportunities. Global South cities are thus not sustaining the formal labor economies associated with the global North. Here, people move largely into informality in terms of both their housing options and the economic opportunities available to them. Therefore, informal trade, informal industries, small-scale industries, informal modes of transportation, informal modes of education, healthcare, etc. are the norm, rather than the exception in African cities. African governance structures and the systems are not adequately geared towards responding to this informality, with cities aspiring to become progressively and quite rapidly more formal, and thereby look to eliminate rather than regulate their informality. The third megatrend is becoming increasingly prominent, even as it remains difficult to properly isolate and quantify its impact. This demographic shift, which is often referred to as a youth bulge, is observed across the global south, but particularly in Africa, where the current average age is 19.7 years old. A medium which, over the next 10 to 20 years, will continue to drop significantly. Presently, 50% of the people on the African continent are below the age of 18. This cohort is projected to number 1 billion by 2055, and by the turn of the next century, it is estimated that 50% of the global population aged 18 and below will reside in Africa. If we consider the prevalence of unemployment in the formal job market, coupled with increasingly high levels of informality, it is important to consider the future we imagine these youth will inhabit. In a world constrained by resource depletion, climate change, etc., it is a given that an urban youth population will constitute the bulk of the informal workforce. We therefore need to ask significant questions about how youth are factored into and engaged in policy process, especially those pertaining to food. If food enables wellness and creates the opportunity for a good life, how do we start to think of a child-centered food system which takes into account, from the point of newly conceived life, making adequate provision for the nutritional needs of both mother and child? How do we lay the foundations to ensure that the youth conceived today are provided with the optimal conditions and opportunities to thrive? If we fail to make this priority a reality, the populations of the global south will continue to find themselves persistently on the back foot. Technological change in work, digitization and informality. The next trend, which we have touched on briefly, is a large influx of people into cities, which is compounded by the presence of informality. This transition is highly influenced by humanity's increasing reliance on technology and digitization, which is altering the traditional structure and nature of work and the way economies themselves function. We're observing the potential for an economic exclusion of significant numbers of people who lack access to the internet. Communities without reliable and affordable access to the types of quality technology required to effectively participate in the digital economy are relegated to navigating limited and declining industrial employment options. This is why we see the youth population seeking work in other ways, largely within the informal sector. However, we witness varied forms of informal hybridity and different versions of informal that depart from the traditional industrial manufacturing imaginations. We also see an increase in technology platforms enabling a whole set of processes, further shaking up the world of work in Africa. On the African continent, this includes innovations such as M-Pesa. Online purchasing is growing and changing the nature of food retail. So when we consider how cities, the youth living in those cities, and new technological capabilities all intersect, we start to see a pathway towards a very different way in which both work and the opportunity to obtain employment all start to connect. The final trend we are addressing today is that of a shift in global economic power to Asia. This shift is often framed negatively. However, across the African continent, the predominant outlook is more positive. The reality remains that this geopolitical shift is taking place, with different actors starting to upend the global status quo. The traditional rules of the game, the Anglophone, Francophone or Lusophone ways in which African countries have responded, are starting to shift. Some changes are more overt, while others are less evident. China's Belt and Road Initiative obviously perceives Africa as a key component of this initiative. Japan exercises soft power through funding master plans and support for education. Korea funds technological support, playing a role in developing power generation plants, etc. India provides machinery and mobility support across the continent. All these countries are playing a more significant role in the region, with African governments increasingly engaging their Asian counterparts. Less evident is the extent to which African and Asian cities are currently engaging. However, there is a notable emerging trend, with lessons to be learned from the recent and rapid urbanization many Asian cities have undergone. The question is how to make these models contextually relevant in Africa. These questions are important when we consider food, because they underpin how our food systems operate, influencing the type and quantity of food available in cities from now and into the future. If we devolve this question to the level of the household and the person who manages the procurement, nutritional balance, preparation and distribution of food, mostly women in the African context, what we understand is policymakers and urban planners do not adequately consider the needs and challenges facing these role players as they make calculated daily decisions on how best to provide their dependents with optimal nutrition. These decisions form part of a daily survival dance made by households with the information at their disposal, even as they try to anticipate and prepare for the future, and maybe that future is just tomorrow, while simultaneously factoring in past decision-making mistakes and lessons. This ability to make informed and calculated decisions is a form of agency. Understanding agency is an essential policy consideration. This has implications for understanding trends and the so-called thick now. How the changes these catalyze, as well as the rationalization processes households engage in order to arrive at their food-related decisions, is a key point that needs to be considered. Food gives us a lens to see the trends that are already starting to impact future developments in terms of how, in most cases, limited resources are deployed to equip physically, emotionally, cognitively our future citizens. Understanding these trends is essential for another reason. And here we talk about understanding the pace layers of change. Stuart Brand posits 6 layers of change, which will relate to the megatrends. The first layer of change relates to fashion and art, the second to commerce, third infrastructure, fourth governance, the fifth culture, and the sixth nature. Fashion changes quickly, really making an enduring impact. It creates change, often at a swift pace with rapid-fire changes. Commerce equally changes quite quickly, over a decade. Substantial ebbs and flows will be observed in economic performance. Infrastructure, when built well, can last for 50 to 60 years. These 3 layers of change happen quickly. They absorb shocks, they attract great attention. Think of a new freeway, such as Nairobi's new bypass, or Cape Town Stadium built for the 2010 World Cup soccer. These processes are transient, emerging and changing swiftly. They absorb many shocks, they can be sites of innovation, they occur quickly before rapidly moving on to something else. When we consider governance, both in terms of bureaucratic functions as well as their ideological underpinnings, for example, democracy or socialism, etc., we contend with a phenomena that changes at far more glacial pace. Culture changes even slower, with nature taking eons to achieve discernible changes, although climate change is driving changes occurring at an unprecedented pace. These processes of governance, culture, and nature hold memory. They integrate rather than absorb shocks, are continuous and constrained, while at the same time offering consistency that is known and understood. It is here, in the last 3 layers, governance, culture, and nature, that power sits. From a food systems perspective, while a new trend might get all the attention, this might influence responses for a short period of time. Food systems change can be more effectively locked in where governance and cultural processes are concerned. So from an urban food systems perspective, we're observing a transition from a food system that has traditionally been governed by national government, where it was all about growing more food. Agriculture and food security have dominated governance and infrastructure, determined how we engage and use nature. In our transition to a predominantly urban world, a world in which cities need to understand questions of food systems governance, how the intersections with food inform the culture of the city and the urban life, start to take on far more robust and longer-lasting urban food system considerations. Because it is here that changes we're seeing as a result of these megatrends that one can start to program and can create the consistency of a continuous food system to provide wellness and a just and equitable urban food system. So these megatrends are important for food. This ends this video. The next video will start to contextualize these in terms of the layers of change and how megatrends relate to change and change processes and what this might mean for governance.